certified IAAPA certified accessibility professional. Wow, so many words. In any event, without further ado, I would like to introduce the esteemed John Sage. Give it up.
Well, thank you, Chris, and I'm very appreciative of CLIA. CLIA, I think you know the slogan, "We are Cruise." And does anybody remember what the A is in the word R? Shannon? Oh, Chris knows. Accessibility. So CLIA has accessibility as one of their three main words. So I really appreciate CLIA and having me here. I was speaking with my daughter this week about cruising. And she'd been cruising before. She keeps on pestering me, when do I get to go on a cruise again? I said, well, we went to Alaska, you got to see whales and dolphins and mountains. What was your favorite part? And she said, when a bird pooped on mommy and daddy. And so, everybody has a different interest in cruising, but that's what she remembers. And cruising has been near and dear to my heart through all three companies. We work with cruise lines in various ways. And truly, cruising is one of the most accessible ways to go on vacation. And there really is a whole lot of interest from the disability community. Did I forget I've got my clicker. Let me just ask real quick, show of hands, who here is with a cruise line? Okay. Who here is with a port or destination? Okay. And any other shipbuilders, suppliers, anybody else? Okay. All right, good. All right, we've got a diverse crew here. Let me go ahead and get started talking about the market. And I titled this the 7 myths of accessible travel, because I continually ask myself the question, what prevents companies from having more success in this space? And I'm an entrepreneur and a business person. I'm looking for business success, because it is a huge market to succeed in. And what I found is a lot of times it's myths and misconceptions is why companies don't really succeed here. And so I tried to gather those in 7 myths, and so that's what I'll be speaking to today. The first one is the market, because we are parts of businesses and destinations, and we want people to travel, but we need to understand that market. So the first myth is that accessibility is about wheelchairs. When you think about the poster child for accessible travel, it's not me, actually. It's not me, it's not somebody in a wheelchair. The truth is that 20% of the population has some type of disability, whether that's mobility, vision, hearing, cognitive sensory, or allergies. Let me ask another show of hands, who here has a friend or family that has one of these, whether it's a food allergy or a sensory, mobility, doesn't want to walk a long distance? Yeah, it affects really all of us in some way. And if you want to travel with that friend or family member, you're going to go to a place that's accessible. That's what's you're not going to travel with them to a place that's not accessible or a poor experience. And so it really, even though it's 20% of the population, it affects a larger percentage than that through friends and family. I'll also mention that there's some other ways that you can sort of wrap your head around the size of this market. So there are non-visible disabilities. So those are things that could be a heart condition or circulatory or something that you look at somebody and you don't know that they have a disability. Oftentimes they don't identify themselves as disabled. If you ask them in a census, do you have a disability? They say no. If you start asking more questions about, do you have difficulty walking long distances and standing for long periods of time, then they say yes. So there's a lot of people where it's underrepresented in a lot of surveys because of the non-self-identification. The other one is temporary disabilities. My mother tripped over her grandchild and broke her knee, and she was temporarily disabled. They already had a trip booked to Normandy, and my dad asked me, said, is Omaha Beach or Utah Beach more accessible? And I had been there and I knew the answer, and he finally got why I started the company is because information is so key, and knowing where to go is essential to the disabled traveler. Myth number 2, people with disabilities are less attractive customers. Sometimes you think, oh, well, they have a disability, they're less likely to travel, so we really shouldn't market to them. The truth is that people with disabilities are some of the best customers for multiple reasons. And let me start, illustrate this by talking to you about one of these individuals here. I'll point because I don't think the laser pointer will work, but this guy right here, that's Dr. Julius Dean. He lives here in Florida. He's a heart surgeon. So he does not have any really constraints on price for traveling. He's a heart surgeon. But some things about Dr. Julius, he loves photography. He loves his wife. She has multiple sclerosis. He wants to plan trips that are comfortable for her. And so that's really the need. He's a great customer. You know, he has the time and money to travel. So he can travel in the off season. In fact, they like to travel in the off season because the heat flares up her multiple sclerosis. So from the business perspective, you don't want the peak season travelers. Those cabins and those rooms are already filled. You want the off season travelers. Where are you going to find those? Those are people who don't have kids in school, who don't have Monday to Friday jobs. They're retirees. Half of seniors have a disability. So this is, if you want to talk about sustainability, if you want to talk about environmental impact, you want to talk about revenue and increasing the bottom line, off-season travelers are a key component of that. They're also, people with disabilities are also loyal customers. There's been statistics cited by one of the cruise lines. They did an analysis internally. We also know anecdotally, we ask a lot of people with disabilities, do you travel? We say, yeah, we travel, but we go to the same 3 places over and over because they know that their needs will be met. They tend to be multi-generational. So when Dr. Julius and his kids and his grandkids travel, they want to make sure that they go on a cruise that has accessible shore excursions. They don't want to leave grandma on the ship. If grandma gets left on the ship, they're not coming back. And so it's essential that all aspects of multi-generational travel, including the grandparents, get taken care of. Here's something else that's really interesting about this demographic. So, and I was fortunate, one of the advisory boards I'm on, I get to advise the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. And I was in this meeting in the Department of Commerce building, and I only had about 40 seconds to talk to her. And I said one thing, I gave her one message. I said, I'm a manual wheelchair user. I'm CEO of 3 accessible travel companies. I travel all the time. I'm on the internet all the time. You know, I am the perfect customer to market to. And I receive 0 accessible travel ads. 0. No company or destination is marketing to me, which is just incredible when you consider that's 20% of the population is not being marketed to. And so that's why we do call this, you know, the way that I describe this demographic, it's the last untapped travel demographic. It's really overlooked in that respect. Okay, so those are a couple of the myths around the market. Now I'll get into more of myths around the problem. So there is a myth that people with disabilities have what they need to travel. Okay, so this makes it into all my presentations. These are the 3 pillars of accessible travel. And when somebody asks you, what did you learn at Seatrade? You can say, I learned about the 3 pillars of accessible travel. This was originally developed by European Network of Accessible Tourism and Visit England. And after planning thousands of trips for people with disabilities over 13 years, I wholeheartedly agree with these 3. The first one is facilities, and that's what most people think about. They think about the slope of this ramp. They think about the width of a door. They think about grab bars next to a toilet. There's also website accessibility for blind people or other disabilities, or that for the deaf and things like that. That's what most people wrap their head around. That's where the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and other legal compliance focuses. But that's just one of the 3, and they are pillars, so you need all 3. The second is around customer service. So those are policies, processes, and training. And I'll get into more details about that. And the last is information. The key thing here is that legal compliance only addresses one of these. And so the other 2 aren't really addressed, but disabled travelers need them. So I'm going to go into more detail about each of these. Okay, accessible facilities. How many of you thought you'd see a picture of a toilet today? This illustrates the point. Here are 14 accessibility features about a toilet. And I'll mention one of the things, the ones that are yellow here are not addressed by the ADA. They are in legal compliance standards in some other countries, but not in the US. And then things like the rug on the ground or where the trash can is positioned. That's not in any type of legal standard. You know, and this is only the toilet. I haven't even gotten into the sink or the shower or moved out of the bathroom to get to the bed and the desk and the closet and the balcony. And I haven't even gotten downstairs to get into the restaurant and the check-in counter and the gym and the pool. I haven't even left the hotel. I've still got to get into ground transportation and sightseeing and flying and all these things. So accessibility is more complex than a lot of people think. We often hear, oh, well, just give us a checklist for accessibility. So that doesn't work. It doesn't fit on a page or 2 pages. It's a little more complex than that. So that's something that is key around the facilities. Customer service, policies, processes, and role-specific training. I'll mention it's sort of a policy, it's sort of a communication message. It's one of the things that sort of irks me in the travel industry, and the way it has to do with tenders. The way that cruise tenders, the way that I've had it communicated to me, the exact phrasing is, people getting on the tenders must be able to step onto the tender. That's how it's been communicated to me. Now, the truth is, I've been to Venice, I've been on and off boats there, I've been on and off boats all over the place. That's not really necessary if I have some friends with me. We can easily clear this little gap. But the way that it's messaged is I must be able to step. And so that is a sort of policy issue that comes from the disabled traveler perspective. It makes people feel a little lesser than, that they have to be able to do something to participate. And so it's those types of policies, and that's just one example, and I'm not picking on cruise or tenders or anything like that, but policies can be accessibility barriers. Processes, so some of the cruise lines, I don't know if it happens anymore, but some cruise lines and hotels require calling in to reserve the accessible cabin. Or if I call Hertz and I want to have hand controls, on the website I can book a ski rack, I can book a child seat, I can't book hand controls, I have to call in. So that process becomes an accessibility barrier. The last is role-specific training. And there's when we speak about training for disability, there's one topic that always comes up. Any guesses about what subject people that we speak with want to hear the most in training? Any guesses? It's the terminology. It's the terminology, is disability terminology. And the reason is people want to say the right thing. They don't want to offend somebody into their face and use the wrong word. In the UK, handicapped is considered offensive. On all the disabled parking spots, it says handicapped in the US. And so there's a lot of terminology. Now, what I tell people, I said, okay, if terminology is at the top of your list, from me, my perspective, I don't care what you tell me. I just want to be able to reach the clothes hangers in the closet. You know, so if that makes you uncomfortable, that's about number 100 on my list. So can you work on the other 99? You know, those are the ones that are really going to get me to spend my money at
Yeah.
your business. Accessibility information. So this is the biggest, the most common miss across the travel industry. And that is that if you want to gain the trust of a person with disabilities to leave the comfort of their home where all their accessibility features are set up just how they like it, if you want to gain their trust, you need to assure them that they're going to have a positive experience. They're not going to feel disabled when they travel, because that's how we feel often when we encounter accessibility barriers. And the way you do that is through accessibility information, but the industry doesn't do a very good job of that. And we know from a bunch of experience, we've identified 5 requirements for effective accessibility information. And that is that it's accurate, so it needs to be verified and up to date. A lot of times self-reporting accessibility information is incorrect. There's a bunch of experience we have with self-reporting being incorrect. It needs to be detailed, as in having measurements. It needs to be clear, as in having photographs. It needs to be comprehensive, all parts of the hotel or the ship, all parts of the travel journey, and it needs to be trusted. It needs to be according to international standards or some travel expert. It can't just be sort of Joe Summer intern writing it down. And when you check all these boxes, because across the industry this is not really done well, there's a significant competitive advantage just in gathering the information. And how expensive is this? There's a huge ROI from just gathering the accessibility details in the right way and conveying them and making them publicly available. And so this is a real opportunity for the whole industry. Now, I mentioned 3 pillars because that's what disabled travelers need, but we are businesses and destinations. So we actually have different metrics. We need people to come, and we need to be profitable. And so the 4th add-on pillar here is around marketing. Because if you do the first 3, but you don't let anybody know about it, people don't come. Or it's word of mouth, but that's really, really slow if you only rely on word of mouth. You wouldn't only rely on word of mouth for any other traveler demographic. So you definitely want to do it here as well. But you need to understand how people with disabilities need to be communicated to. And this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is humans. This is what we need. And we start down at the bottom. We need our physiological and our safety needs met first. The issue is that a lot of the destination marketing people and the marketing people, the agencies, the ones that are inside the big companies, they're focusing on the esteem, belonging, they're focusing on inspiration and experiences. But from the disabled traveler perspective, until you've assured them that, hey, I have a comfortable bed height so that my shoulder doesn't hurt, that I can shower comfortably, until you assure them of that, it doesn't matter how all the experiences and inspiration. And so this is where the marketing agencies miss, that they don't provide enough detail to make sure that the disabled traveler's primary needs are met. Okay, so I went into the market, went into the problem. You now know the 3 pillars of accessible travel. Now to talk about some myths around the solution, because there are myths about how to meet these needs. So the first one that we hear when I talk, I'm on the World Travel and Tourism Council, and I get to talk to a lot of executives, and I hear, yeah, we're ADA compliant. And so that's really the common at the executive level, that's really sort of their understanding of this, is we're ADA compliant. But the truth is that compliant is not accessible, and I'll tell you exactly why. So the Americans with Disabilities Act and other national standards address the built environment and information technology websites. They cover the initial construction. They're not regularly audited. So in a hotel, the person that inspects this shows up before the furniture's in the room. That's something I learned recently. It's amazing. So the ADA doesn't address furniture, and it doesn't address customer service and those processes and things like that. The enforcement is only through lawsuits. One of the big cruise lines here got hit with a DOJ lawsuit. The DOJ, they like to make examples. That's how they enforce the ADA. There's not an ADA police that comes around. And so, there's pros and cons of that, but that's how it happens. And so when you realize that the ADA and compliance is not accessible, and you start talking with somebody, beware when somebody says we are ADA compliant, because if that's their focus, they're basically saying we're not accessible. They're just focusing on the compliance. So this is a big myth, is ADA compliance is not going to lead to any business success. Okay, accessibility is about customer service. So this is tell us what you need and we will do our best to accommodate you. It's real common in event registrations, and you've signed up for here. I'm sure there's something that says tell us about any food allergies or special needs or anything else we need to know. But what happens is when I sign up for something, I'm not going to go through all the list of things that I need. I'm just not going to spend the time. In fact, that's not really my responsibility to make sure that your event or your travel package is accessible. And so as a result, if you want to know what the biggest accessibility barrier that I had encountered today, I'll show you. I have it on me. The biggest accessibility barrier that I encountered today was this. It was this stir that I can't reach. I couldn't reach it out here at the coffee bar. And so I have to ask somebody to help me. And all of a sudden, my day where I feel really empowered, I'm speaking at this great conference, we have a bunch of meetings, all of a sudden I feel my disability. The stir caused me to feel my disability. And so that is, the issue is, I shouldn't have to communicate that the stir needs to be at this height level. It should be the business, the accessibility, the responsibility for accessibility should fall on the business if they want to succeed, not on the consumer. And so and we've seen this in shore excursions, we've seen it in planning packages, we've seen it in consulting, all these different ways, that a proactive approach to accessibility is profitable, but a reactive approach where somebody comes to you and says, oh, I have an accessibility need, and that's the first time you've really thought about accessibility, that becomes time consuming to do a bunch of customization. It becomes risky because you may or may not have done a comprehensive job of analyzing the accessibility features. And by the time you spend all the time doing all this, and you take the value of those salaries off, it's often not profitable because you're customizing accessibility on a case-by-case basis. And so a proactive approach gets rid of all of that and makes accessibility profitable. Here's one. I hear this sometimes. We're a historic site, so we can't be accessible. Any guesses on where these two are? Yeah, Rome, Pompei. Yep, Pompei and the Spanish Steps. And so I've heard this before. I said, well, what would the Spanish Steps be with a wheelchair ramp going up it? You hear that. And on the left is Pompei. Here's an interesting thing about why those big stones are in the middle of the street, and I like to play tour guide sometimes. It's so that wagons could go through down the street, but it's so the pedestrians could step from stone to stone and not step in the stuff that's left behind the horse pulling the wagon. And that's why those are there, but those are obviously accessibility barriers. And so how are you going to make that accessible? The truth is, it is accessible. This is on the left, that's me. They put down metal grates to provide some accessible routes through Pompei and Herculaneum, which is nearby. And the Spanish Steps, they didn't install a wheelchair ramp to get up to the top, but there is an elevator. There's the metro station is located right there. Now, there's not a very good sign to show that it's there, but the Spanish Steps are accessible. There's an elevator nearby. And so, when I mentioned that Pompei, 10% of Pompei is accessible, I said, okay, if Pompei can be accessible, then your old building can be made accessible. There's certainly a way to do that. It doesn't stop it. Go back. The last myth is that accessibility is expensive. And that's not the case. It doesn't require knocking out walls to make things accessible. So here's a couple examples, is towel placement and coffee supply placement. On the right is the bed type. So a lot of people with disabilities need what's called a Hoyer lift to get from their wheelchair into bed, and that lift requires being able to roll under the bed. So these platform type beds are not accessible. Any room that has a platform type bed is not accessible to somebody that needs a Hoyer lift. And so what does it cost to choose the right bed type? It's the same cost. It's the platform that holds up the mattress. And so it's a choice really there. And those towels, I even have a towel here. I took this from the hotel, don't say anybody, don't tell anybody. One of the things that this is actually an accessibility tool for me, because when I stay in a hotel, just about anywhere in the world, every day the housekeeping comes in and puts the handheld shower nozzle back out of reach. And so what I have to do, I've gotten pretty good at this, I twirl this around, I whip it, I knock the thing back off so that I can reach it. Hits me occasionally, but I haven't sued anybody yet. That's not, I don't like to use lawsuits, and I don't think that's the right way to encourage accessibility. I'd much rather use a carrot approach than the stick. But that's an example of training being very inexpensive to make something accessible. If the handheld shower nozzle is left down, leave it there. Don't put it back up. Okay. sort of to get into some summary things about the path forward. So here are the 7 truths about accessible travel. This is just recounting what I said. If you want to take a picture, pass this along. These are the 7 truths. So it's 20% of the population. It's not 2%, 1.5% of the population that are wheelchair users. 20% of the population. This demographic, they're loyal. They travel in the off season. They're multi-generational. The 3 pillars of travel: facilities, training, information, and the last one that I added on is marketing. Accessibility is going beyond compliance. You have to go beyond the legal requirement. Accessibility needs to be proactive. Accessibility can be done in historic places, and accessibility is often inexpensive. Travel businesses and destinations that wrap their heads around these 7 truths can succeed because it's a really compelling business case to be accessible. This is a huge demographic that's not very competitive in terms of the supply. The demand is there, the supply is not there yet, but we're making a bunch of progress. CLIA is one of the organizations making that happen. Okay, so a path forward for cruise lines. These are some of the clients that we've had over the years in various places. I'm sure you probably recognize some of them. Path forward for the cruise lines, so 4 parts, is onboard accessibility. So accessibility needs to be assessed and published, and it needs to go beyond the ADA or the PVAG, Passenger Vessel Accessibility Guidelines. It's basically the US version, the ship version of the ADA, so they're almost identical. I'll say that progress is being made here. We recently did a project for MSC Cruises, and they had already focused on accessibility a good bit, but we came on board and identified over 200 accessibility barriers that they are now going to incorporate into their new ship build, and it will be the most accessible ship on the seas. So that's great, and those learnings are being spread across MSC and hopefully across the shipbuilders, so we're making progress there. Onshore, this is one of the real successes in all the travel industry, is us partnering with the cruise lines on accessible shore excursions. Prior to us coming around, a lot of the accessible shore excursions, the cruise line went to the local operator and said, give us an accessible tour. The local operator didn't know much about accessibility, but they tried to do it, so they'd take their shortest, quickest, simplest shore excursion. They'd add an accessible bus, and they'd drive the disabled traveler around the island for 2 hours. You got to see the destination through the bus window. That was the most common type of panoramic accessible tour before we came along. We do small group accessible shore excursions, and we are now, by the end of this year, we'll be working with 17 cruise lines. So that's been all happened in the last 5 years. It's a huge amount of progress that we've made by partnering with the cruise lines, and the cruise lines, everybody benefits from that. So that's been really exciting. The third is role-specific training. So training, a disabled cruise passenger is going to encounter multiple roles during this. They'll encounter reservations, the housekeeping, the food and beverage, the shore excursions, the tour guides, and so each of them needs to be trained differently. It's not just a disability awareness training and a disability terminology and etiquette training. That is needed, but there does need to be specific training for each of those roles to really succeed. And the last item here, this is the marketing, is making sure that it's active and targeted. So, you can go back to your cruise line and say, what are we spending? Or this is what I say, this is the right way to ask it. Say, show me the last accessible travel ad that we published. And when they come back and they don't have one, it can start to generate some questions about, well, why haven't we created an accessible travel ad? And those advertisements don't need to be on the television on the Super Bowl halftime. They don't need to be there. They can be very targeted. You can reach people with disabilities in online and offline communities. And so there really is an opportunity there that is not that expensive to market to this demographic, and that this demographic is thirsty to be marketed to. So the question is, are these your new loyal customers? These are the 4 steps to accomplish that. A lot of businesses are not sure really how they're doing on accessibility, so we created a survey here that asks questions around accessibility to really figure out where you are right now. And so this is a survey. You can scan this. Hopefully you can, I don't know if you can see it from here, but you can come up and scan it afterwards. This is a survey. It's a couple dozen questions. It's not very long, and it'll allow you to sort of realize, okay, what are we doing well? What are some of our gaps? And I would just like to thank all of you for attending. There's a lot of great material here, and the fact that you took your time to learn a little bit more about accessibility is really encouraging for me. I think this is really exciting for the cruise industry, and I really just thank you for being here.
Before we depart, we wanted to have a few minutes for Q&A.